Welcome, everyone in the webcast audience. I'm Terry Maggedy, the chair of our elder law section of the Trusted Estates section in the Beverly Hills Bar. And what a thrill to to have our speaker today. And it's just one of the great things about Zooming. I know people like to get together in person too, but the wonderful thing about Zooming is we can have Nicole here with us in Israel, and we could all be together wherever anyone in our audience is. So it's very nice. And the first thing I do is thank our sponsors. And our screen in a minute, we should have our list of sponsors up there. And we'll start with Nancy Sanborn and Brian Joy of the Sanborn team, real estate experts, brokers in the fields that we deal with, which are sales by fiduciary, sales in probate, sales in trusts, sales in conservatorships. And Nancy and Brian are experts in those areas. And then we also want to thank, I'll put them together because they're really a team. Bond Services of California, which provides bonding for all the attorneys, the cases in our space that we operate in, and Liberty Mutual Surety, which underwrites those bonds. And anybody who works in this field knows who Bond Services is. Liberty Mutual is behind the scenes, but Bond Services is in front of the scenes, and they just provide, just excellent. I think services is the operative word here. They're just like, they're wonderful for all the attorneys who work in our field. Next, I want to thank California Title Company, a title company that works in fiduciary work, trusts, probates. And also I want to thank Pickford Escrow Company, another service provider like Title, but escrow, who deals in our area. And it's so helpful to have people like our sponsors here who know how things operate in our area. When it comes to fiduciaries, probates, conservatorships, trusts, and you could also say just older people in general. So thank you very much to all our sponsors for making our program happen. And today, we're going to hear about everything you wanted to know about older adults buying homes in Israel. And as with so many of our topics, it's a niche area that we're focused on, because if you're in West Los Angeles, as many of the attorneys are who are listening, or financial advisors in West Los Angeles, CPAs, financial consultants, chances are you have a client or know someone who has either bought a home in Israel or is thinking about buying a home in Israel. And the concept of doing that is very appealing to lots of people. But when you go from concept to actually navigating the reality, that's the time you really need expertise. And we're so fortunate to have Nicole Levin here. Nicole is a top-notch real estate attorney in Israel. It's a great endorsement when, like me, I'm dealing with lots of attorneys in Israel, not real estate-oriented attorneys. But when I say real estate and I say, who should anyone talk to, I get Nicole's name by multiple people. So that's pretty high endorsement when you get recommendations from other attorneys in different spaces, in different fields. And when you say real estate, Israel, and homes, they say Nicole. So not only is Nicole an expert in real estate, but she also has another organization called Shemer, Historic Preservation in Israel. And that puts together legal expertise and historic building preservation, which is a a cause of the that Nicole has. It's very nice she has that particular expertise as well. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Nicole for helping us understand buying real estate in Israel.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry, for that wonderful send-off. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nicole Levine, and as you can see, I'm an Israeli real estate attorney. I specialize also in the preservation of historical buildings. I have a degree, a law degree from Bar Ilan University in Israel, and I've been working as a real estate lawyer since about 1983. So it's over a little over 40 years. And I also have a degree, a BA and an MA in the preservation of historical buildings and historical districts. So if you could, Susie, move to the next. Um, okay, so I wanted to discuss a little bit to give a little bit of a background of the history of land ownership in the land of Israel. As you know, Israel's a young state. We're only around since 1948 right now, and and but land ownership goes back for hundreds and I could say thousands of years, but I'm not going to go back thousands of years. So we could just start with the Ottoman rule. The Ottomans ruled the land of Israel for about 500 years, from 1517 to 1917. And they had a law called the Magella, and land which sort of like categorized the sort of land that existed, whether it was farmland, government-owned land, whether it was private-owned land, and each type of land ownership had special rules. And people who were not Ottoman citizens could not own land. Could not own land. You had to be an Ottoman citizen to be registered in their land registry. The type of government that they had was a very like feudal system. Most of the land was owned by governors who were appointed by the Ottoman government and also by local wealthy families. The land was farmed by what they call farmers called falachim, and these farmers would have a 3-year lease and they paid taxes to the Ottomans. In 1908, there was a change in the law. There was a law reform by the Young Turks, and land ownership was also possible for people who were non-citizens as well. So, Susie, can you move to the next slide? Susie? Okay, great. So, if we continue just a little bit of history, um, in 1799, Napoleon conquered the land of Israel, and he made promises to the Jewish people who lived there that he would give them autonomy. Of course, he didn't succeed in conquering the country. He went from south to north. He made it as far as Acre, and he was stopped there. And the British also bombed his troops from the sea, and he was forced to retreat. And then between 1830 and 1840, there was a man by the name of Muhammad Ali Pasha. He was part of the Ottoman Empire. He was an Ottoman governor in Egypt, and he broke away. He conquered the land of Israel. There wasn't much change in laws at that time. It was a period of 10 years. But he left. He was convinced by the British to leave, and he did. And then from then on, from 1840 to 1917, we have a return to Ottoman rule. And then from 1917, after World War I was finished, till 1948, you had the British Mandate. And they brought in British laws with regards to land ownership and town planning. And then in 1948, Israel became a state. They at first adopted the British laws until the Knesset enacted new Israeli legislation. And Susie, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so I just wanted to give you an example, a little story of why the issue of the fact that land ownership could not be held by people who were not Ottoman citizens. So the first Jewish neighborhood outside of the old city, mostly until 1869 or so. The most of the people lived within the old city walls, and then in 1869 they began to demolish the walls, and people began to build neighborhoods outside the old city of Jaffa. So there was land owned by a man named Aharon Shlush. That's him on the bottom, very far left, and he sold the land to Jews from Jaffa and other places that wanted to set up a little neighborhood. And the name of the neighborhood was called Neve Tzedek. It was founded in 1887. And the man that's in the picture next to Shlush is Shimon Rokach, and he was also the founder. He had a house there, as did Shlush. And the picture in the middle is a modern day picture of the neighborhood. It's a historical district, and the houses that were built by the Jews who were not Ottoman citizens had to remain in the name of Aaron Shlush. He was an Ottoman citizen, and it bothered him all the years that the houses that really weren't his. They belonged to people who bought the land from him and built houses, and it bothered him all the years that it was still in his name. After World War I, he passed away in 1920, and he left a will. And in his will, he wrote that he asked that the registration of title in the name of the actual owners be completed. On the far right is his son, Yosef Eliyahu Shlush. And when the British came and they set up a land registry in 1921, he tried very hard to get it registered in the names of the people. And the people, the clerks in the land registry kept saying, bring this form, bring that form. What about the taxes? Were taxes paid? And he just couldn't finish it. And finally, one day he said to the clerk, I have to get this done. My father even wrote it in his will. And the clerk said to him, your father wrote it in his will, meaning he bequeathed all these houses to these and these people? Bring the will. And so he brought the will, and in one day they registered all the houses in the names of the people who bought those houses. So as a real estate lawyer and also someone who deals with wills and estates, I like this story because it just shows how, if you want to pass on land or property to the next generation, please make a will. Susie, can you go to the next slide? Another similar story is the neighborhood of Nachalat HaShiva in Jerusalem, which was founded in 1869. This was the third Jewish neighborhood outside the old city of Jerusalem. And there were 7 Jewish families from Jerusalem that bought the land, but they had to register the land in the name of the wife of one of the families because she had Ottoman citizenship and they didn't. So again, you have a situation where they had to find ways to register property in the names of someone who had Ottoman citizenship. Of course, like I said before, this all changed in 1908 when the law in Turkey changed. Susie, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so what do we have here in land ownership during the Ottoman and the British Mandate periods? So there was a period where we had a concept called land redemption, where people would buy back large tracts of lands from the owners, and they got private ownership. If it was during the Ottoman period up to 1908, then they had to, of course, be either Ottoman citizens or register it in the name of somebody else who was. And then afterwards, they could register this in their own names. So the land was registered in the names of the purchasers, and it stayed in the Ottoman Land Registry. And then later, the British Mandate Land Registry took over and continued the registration. The financing came from personal funds of the purchasers with assistance from private Jewish investors and Jewish organizations in the diaspora. Can you move to the next slide, please? Again, privately owned land. So in Israel today, it's a known thing that only 10% of the land is direct ownership. And so this stems from land that was purchased by Jews from the owners during the Ottoman and British periods. And I have here examples of small. These places originally started as small agricultural villages. Today they're major cities. You have here Petach Tikva, Rishon LeZion, Rehovot, Zichron Yaakov. And I also included here Tel Aviv, which was founded in 1909. And on the right, you have a picture of the Patrick Geddes town plan for Tel Aviv that was done in 1925. But the picture below is a group of people, the founding fathers of Tel Aviv. There were 66 families, 66 people, if I count husband and wife. And they did a lottery to decide who gets which plot of land. And this was privately owned land that they got, and it was registered in their names in the land registry. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, now, after that, there was massive purchase of land during the Ottoman period and the British Mandate period. I have here a picture of a man on the right-hand side of the screen. His name was Yehoshua Chenkin. He was like an amazing, I guess you could call him a real estate agent. He would find the owners of the land. Not always did they live in the country. Many of them were wealthy families. They lived in Beirut, Lebanon, or they lived in Damascus, Syria, which were considered good neighborhoods at the time. And Ottoman Palestine, or even British Palestine, was not considered great neighborhoods. And he would go up there, he would negotiate the price, and he would buy large tracts of land. In 1901, the Jewish National Fund was established, and they put up the money for a lot of the purchase of the land. A lot of land was purchased by companies. People got together abroad, not in the land of Israel, but Jews in the diaspora, got together. They would form companies, they would sell shares, and they would buy up land. Usually, these were used for agricultural settlements, like a kibbutz or a moshav, or agricultural villages. They dealt with forestry, planting a forest, and they also built neighborhoods in existing cities like Tel Aviv, cities in neighborhoods in Jerusalem, Haifa, and they gave loans for land purchase. So this is the Jewish National Fund and other organizations that dealt with this kind of land purchase. Can you go to the next? Okay. So then when we get to Israel, we're left with the state of Israel, we're left with two types of land ownership. One is, like I said, the 10%, which is land purchased by private individuals and companies. And the second type is 90% of the land, and there's three sources for this 90% of the land ownership, and it's owned by the government. It's owned by the government of Israel. So the first source is all that land that was purchased by the JNF and other public companies. And the law that applies to this is the land law of 1969. I also put in the Hebrew year, because in all laws in Israel, they put both the Gregorian year and the Hebrew year. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. So another source of publicly owned lands were lands that the British Mandate government gave over to the Israeli government. So here I have two examples. So the first one on top is there were, from the 1860s onwards, there was a group of Christians from Wittenberg, Germany, that came to the land of Israel and set up colonies. They set up colonies in several cities. These were agricultural colonies, and they lived a simple agricultural life. The first one was in Haifa. There's one in Jerusalem. There's two in Tel Aviv, in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, and then in other places in the country. And the one on top is called the picture on top is called Sarona. It's located now in Tel Aviv. And these Germans, when they came, they had a lot of problems with their own government, and and so that was but they believed that they have to live in the Holy Land and work the land. In 1898, when the Kaiser of Germany came to visit, he was very happy to see a lot of German citizens living in the land because all the big countries at the time wanted a foothold in the Holy Land. But the problem was that it was controlled by the Ottomans. So he was very happy to see a lot of German citizens there. And as a result, he said to them, the German government will pay for the education. And since that time, the education of the children in these colonies came from the German government. However, in the 1930s, with the rise of Nazi Germany, unfortunately, this caused the fact that a lot of Nazi propaganda was brought into these schools, and you had a lot of Nazis or Nazi sympathizers. And then when World War II broke out, the British rounded up all these people and deported them. Some they sent back to Germany, and some they sent for some reason, I don't know why, to Australia, and they stayed there. They never came back because after the war was over and what happened in the Holocaust became apparent, they felt that they wouldn't be welcome and they wouldn't have been, so they never came back, and their lands were became part of public, lands that were abandoned. And so basically, when Israel became a state, those lands became part of the Israeli government, being owned by the Israeli government. Years later, when the Israeli government negotiated with the German government for reparations for the Holocaust, they did a calculation, the worth of these lands, and they deducted them from the reparations. So basically, the Israeli government ended up buying them back from the Germans. And here you have all these German colony. This particular Sarona, they made it into a park. But other places in the German colonies, like in Jerusalem and Haifa, the buildings are owned by private people and are lived in by private people. Another example of a land given over to the government is the picture below. There was a Jewish agricultural school called Mikveh Yisrael. The man in the picture, he founded it. He was from France. He was a businessman, and his name was Karl Netter, and he founded this school. And the Sultan allotted them 3,000 dunams of land. A dunam is like 1,000 square meters. I don't know how much it comes to in acres. And he built a beautiful agricultural school. And this is one of the buildings from the school. The school is still functioning to this day. And the Sultan gave them a long-term lease for like 1,000 years, which then the British government, of course, gave over to the Israeli government when they left in 1948. So that's a second source of land that's owned by the government. If you can go to the next slide. So the next slide, the third source of lands are lands that were abandoned by Arabs during the War of Independence of 1948. And there's a special law that deals with these type of lands. And these are lands that went over to the Israeli government and are also administered and sold by the Israeli government. So these are the three sources of lands that are publicly owned by the government. And that brings it roughly to 90% of the land in the country. Can you go to the next slide? So the reason why it's important that I'm telling this to you is because, again, it shows you that the different types of land ownership. So we have the direct or the private ownership. Then we have the land owned by the government. It's administered by a government agency called the Israeli Land Authority. And what you get is a long-term lease for 49 years. At the end of the 49 years, it's renewed for another 49 years. Another type of land ownership, I call it ownership, but it's not really ownership, which is the right to use. And that's also important for elderly people who are buying into a retirement home. And usually the right that they get is a right to use the space that they're living in. It's not direct ownership. And but all of these different types of rights are registered in the Israeli Land Registry Office, which took over from the British Mandate Land Registry Office, which took over from the Ottoman Land Registry Office. The Israeli Land Registry Office, it's completely computerized. Things are all done digitally. It works very well. Every time you want to do a transfer of title, everything has to be perfect, no mistakes at all. I will get to that a little bit later on. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, the most prevalent ones are long direct ownership and long-term lease. They're both registered in the land registry. Apartment buildings, commercial buildings, townhouses, and duplexes are usually registered as condominiums. And then each apartment within the condominium gets a separate registration as a separate unit. And in the land registry, you could go and you could see also the plans of all the building. It tells you if there's any spaces that are attached to a specific apartment, like for example, a parking space, a storage unit, the roof, who owns the roof, to which apartment is it attached, a garden, if it's a garden apartment, the garden should be attached to that particular apartment. So that's all very, very, very important, and it's all registered in the land registry. They also register like bylaws of the condominium, and so it's all very, very exact. And private houses, though, you have a plot of land and you slap down, you built a private house. They're usually registered as land, as just a plot of land. Um, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. The right to use. So here I have a picture of a new retirement home that was built in the city of Modi'in. And usually the way it works is um, these retirement homes, if you want to buy space in them, first of all, you have to depending on the home, um, you have to have a certain amount of good health. If you're completely in a bed and you really need hospitalization, they don't accept you. But you could buy a small apartment in these. The apartments are usually pretty small, but you put down a certain amount of money, and then as the years goes by, the amount of money that you put down is lowered pro rata to the amount of time you were there. When the person passes away, whatever's left of that money goes back to the person's heirs. And the only people who could be accepted into this kind of a project are really people who are, above a certain age, and that's why they want to keep control over who can go in and who could live there, and so therefore they give you only a right to use. This right, in the land registry, they register what's called a caveat warning in the name of the person, and you could and so it protects the rights of the person who bought the apartment. Another thing is that in addition to paying for the apartment, you also pay like a monthly fee, maintenance fee, and it usually includes services like a cafeteria, cleaning of the apartment. If there's a problem, if someone feels ill, there's a buzzer they could press and someone will come and help them. And also, like, there's lectures and other things going on, and the monthly fee that you pay covers those things. So a right to use, you have retirement homes. A lot of the agricultural villages, like a moshav and a kibbutz. A kibbutz is a type of a settlement where all the land, everything is owned together. Although today it's a bit different. It's not the way it used to be. And the same thing with moshavim. Moshavim is you buy a house, you get land around the house, and then you get land that you farm by yourself. And also the rights that the people in the Moshavim have, it's like a right to use the land. There's a historical reason for it. I don't think we have time to get into it. And also there are a lot of residential villages like that as well. And the reason they do that is these are places where they don't want to accept everybody to be able to live there. They want, so if it's only, you get only the right to use, you're also not completely free in who you could sell to. Whoever wants to buy, if you want to sell your house to somebody, the person you're selling to has to be accepted by the committee of the village or the moshav or the kibbutz. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. Other types of purchases of real estate that you could do, buying from a construction company. So there's laws that really protect the buyers. You're buying in a pre-construction stage. In many cases, not even a building permit, or even if there is a building permit, there's nothing there. You're really what they call buying from paper. And so there's laws that protect that deal with who the warranty periods, who's responsible to make repairs and to fix defects in the apartment after it's constructed. There's also a law that deals with the protection of the purchaser's investment. So, for example, if you're paying money and what happens if the company goes bankrupt in the middle and they don't finish the construction. You get there's a law in place to protect the investment of the purchaser. You get a bank guarantee for the money you pay. The money goes into a special account that the construction company can't touch unless they progress in the building stages. And these are all set out in the law. And these laws are laws that cannot be changed in a contract. Meaning, if the law says the red, it's got to be red. You can't write in the contract blue. And so these are what they call cogent. I don't know how the English word for it, but in Hebrew they call it cogenti, meaning it's a law that cannot be changed in a contract. Other types of projects that you could find in Israel is urban renewal projects. So there's like really basically three types. One they call Tama 38, and the second one is Pinui Binui. So I'll explain what each one is. The Tama 38 is a national town plan. They feel that Israel sits on the fault line, the Syrian-African fault line, and they think that at some point there might be an earthquake in the country, and they fear that buildings built before 1980 might not withstand the earthquake. Why? Because in 1980 they changed they made new rules as for construction, and buildings built beforehand, they feel they might not withstand an earthquake. So they came out with this national town plan where they could strengthen the buildings against earthquakes. So the Tama 38, they don't demolish the building, they just strengthen it against against earthquakes. So how do they do it? In some instances, they dig under the building and strengthen the foundations. In some instances, they'll build to the side of the building with rooms of the safe rooms that we have against missile attacks. So those are made out of reinforced concrete. And the people in the building don't pay, the people who own the apartments don't pay anything. A construction company comes in, they do all the work, they pay all the taxes, they pay for everything. The people who own the apartments in the building get a newer apartment with new infrastructure of the apartment, and they might even get an extra room and an extra parking space, et cetera, et cetera. So, but what does the construction company get in return? They get the option to add floors to the building and then sell those new apartments. The law that I talked about before, like buying from a construction company, applies here. The Pinui Binui project is also on the same type of it's part of the National Town Plan, but for buildings that are in such bad condition, they say knock down the building, move the people who are living in the buildings out and pay their rent for the time it takes to reconstruct the building. And then they build a new building on the same plot, and the people who owned apartments there can move in afterwards and they get a brand new apartment. And in some instances, they build the new building on an adjacent plot. The people still live in their old apartments, and then when the apartments in the new plot is finished, they move into the new building, and then their old building is demolished and they're rebuilt. And the third type of urban renewal is the preservation of historical buildings. And now in Israel, I know in the States they're very, very big on historical districts. And now they're doing the same in Israel, where they take a whole neighborhood and it's slated for preservation. And and you can't, even if it's a building inside the district that's not a historical building, you still can't do whatever you want. It has to match the other buildings in the neighborhood. And so those are the three type of urban renewal projects that we have here in Israel. And very often they still fall under the auspices of the laws that deal with protection of purchasers when buying from a construction company. Can you move to the next slide? Okay, secondhand purchases. Okay, secondhand purchases could be, when it's an existing apartment and you buy and you want to buy an apartment in a secondhand, an apartment that already exists. So first of all, you need to hire a lawyer. The lawyer does the title search. We do not have title companies here. We don't have title insurance. The real estate lawyer does the title search. The title search is usually done in the land registry office, the Israeli Land Authority, if it's government-owned land, if it's an apartment building built on government-owned land, registrar of pledges to see that there's any mortgages registered. And if I'm representing a person that's buying an apartment in that kind of a building, I usually tell them, let's do a title search. So we take out an extract from the land registry. That could be done in 2 minutes. And then we also order from the land registry a copy of all the plans of the condominium so that you see exactly the size of the apartment as it's registered. You see what is attached to the apartment, whether it's a garden, a roof, a parking space, a storage unit. And another thing, of course, you get an engineer to check that the apartment is structurally sound. You get an appraiser. I always tell people to get an appraiser, not to appraise the price of the apartment so much, but the appraiser really is the best professional to tell me whether there was any illegal building. Meaning, if there was, let's say there's an apartment and he had a balcony, he had a porch, and it's closed up. It's closed in. Someone built a wall, built a roof over it. How do I know that that was done legally with the building permit? So the appraiser will come to the apartment and then he'll compare what's built to the building permits that appear in the municipality, and then he could tell us. So if there's a legal building, he could say, okay, it's a small thing, you could make it legal by doing ABC. And if it's something that cannot be made legal, then that could be a problem. So that's why it's important. I always tell my clients to get an appraiser. And then once the due diligence is done, we have the contract signing. I negotiate the contract, and then we report it to the tax authorities. And then after taxes are cleared, we have a transfer of title, which the real estate lawyer of the buyer is the one that registers the title in the land registry. Another thing that we do is when we sign the contract, we don't have we have payment schedules, meaning it doesn't go 10% at the signing and 90% at the closing. We have actual payment schedules. So you could have 10 or 20% at the signing, then you could have another 30% a month later, another 10% a month after that, et cetera, till the end, till you do transfer of possession. and the transfer of title is done a little bit afterwards. And so we have a payment schedule, and as a real estate lawyer, what I need to do is we sign the contract. The buyer, usually the way it works is that the buyer brings a bank check, or what you guys call a cashier's check, which is held by the seller's lawyer. The buyer's lawyer runs to the land registry and registered what's called a caveat warning. A caveat warning protects the rights of the buyer. It protects against several things. One, the seller, that once the caveat warning is registered, in Hebrew it's called a he'arat azara, and once the caveat warning is registered in the land registry, the seller cannot sell the property to somebody else. And if the seller is in debt or is sued and they want to put a lien on his rights in the property, if there's already a caveat warning, then the rights of the buyer takes precedence. So that's a very important thing. Another thing is if the buyer is taking a mortgage, then the mortgage bank is going to want to register for itself a caveat warning. All this is done digitally. It doesn't take a long time, but it's all done digitally to the land registry. We report to the taxes. I think I have another slide on taxes, so we'll talk about that in another slide. But we have the buyer pays purchase tax, the seller has capital gains tax, and then once the taxes are cleared, we go to the land registry, and we do a transfer of title. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, I knew I had another slide there about taxes. So taxes and a lot of times there's tax planning. So first, like I said, and these are the laws. The purchase tax is paid by the purchasers, and capital gains tax is paid by the sellers. And then there's also municipal taxes. So the municipal, which also you need to clear before you could do transfer of title. So the purchase tax is all these. How much is the purchase tax? So it goes on a sliding scale. It depends on the price of the apartment or the house, and up to a certain amount of money, it's a certain percentage, etc., etc. I don't want to go into the percentages because, except to say that some people pay higher purchase tax and some people pay a lower purchase tax, and we'll get to that in the next slide. Capital gains tax. Very often the sellers have an exemption from it. They might have an exemption from capital gains tax, and if there is rarely residence and they only own one apartment and they sell it and they haven't sold another apartment at an exemption in the last year and a half, they can get an exemption. But if they're foreign residents, they never have an exemption from capital gains tax, and they need to pay it. And if they need to pay taxes, then we could factor in certain expenses to bring down the tax, like the real estate agency fees, the legal fees, any improvements in the apartment, interest paid on a mortgage, etc., etc. And I understand that there's capital gains tax in the States. Like if an American resident sells an apartment in Israel, he's going to have to pay capital gains tax in the States, but he could deduct from whatever the capital gains tax in the States is, the capital gains tax he paid in Israel. It's not like he pays it twice. Another type of tax, like I said, there's the municipal taxes. So the municipal taxes, there's two types of taxes here. One, it's called Arnona. That's the municipal tax that you pay, the city tax or whatever you want to call it, that you pay. We pay it here every 2 months. Betterment tax is a whole new kettle of fish. It's a different kettle of fish. It's not new. Betterment tax is a tax that you pay when there's a change in the zoning that enhances the worth of the apartment. Like, for example, let's say all of a sudden they change the zoning and they say now all the apartments in this building could extend their apartments and build another room. Well, that means that those apartments are worth more money. Now, when do they pay this tax? They pay it either when they ask for a building permit to build the extension, or if they didn't use the right to extend, they pay it when they sell. And the betterment tax, it could be a lot of money depending on what it is. So that's another tax that we have to make sure that either they don't have or they've paid it and we've cleared it. Now, what I very often do for foreign residents that are selling apartments and they have to pay, they get hit with the capital gains tax bill. If they have no income in Israel and if they're above a certain age, I could turn the capital gains tax into income tax and spread it over 4 years. And the percentage of tax that you pay for income tax is lower than capital gains tax, so you could get a hefty refund. And when when the government gives you back money in a refund, it comes linked to the Israeli Consumer Price Index and plus 4% interest a year. So it's not a bad savings account. So can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so purchase tax. I just want to say a word about purchase tax. Before you do the contract, you have to ask your real estate attorney, how much is the purchase tax going to be? Can I pay the lower tax? So who pays the lower tax? If you're an Israeli resident and this is your only apartment that you're buying, you could pay a lower purchase tax. If you're an Israeli resident and you own additional apartments, then you're going to pay the higher purchase tax, and it's a big difference in money. And if you're a foreign resident, you're always going to pay the higher purchase tax, unless you move to Israel at some point within a requisite period of time, and then you could go and you establish residency, and then you could possibly get a refund by using one of the partial exemptions that the laws allows you. So this is all the purchase tax. So before you buy, you need to crunch the numbers with your real estate lawyer and see how much the purchase tax can be, and is it possible if you actually immigrate to Israel, will you be able to maybe get some of it back? So that's the purchase tax. Now, I have to say, in order to do registration of title, all these taxes need to be cleared, meaning the purchase tax has to be paid by the buyer, the capital gains tax has to be paid or gotten exemption by the seller, and the municipal taxes, the municipality has to give a letter saying that there's no debt to municipal taxes, whether it's the Arnona or the betterment tax. Can you move to the next slide, please? Capital gains tax again. How much could the capital gains tax be? So I usually do a calculation for my client to what could be the worst case scenario that the tax would be. Is he entitled to an exemption? And as I said, if they're a foreign resident selling real estate in Israel, they're not entitled to an exemption. And unless they could prove that in their city of origin, they do not own an apartment. So, for example, if a person lives in Los Angeles and he's selling an apartment he owns in Jerusalem, the question is the apartment or the house that he's living in Los Angeles, is that owned by him or is he renting it? If we could prove that he does not own a property in Los Angeles, then he can get an exemption from capital gains tax. Also, there's all different other types of exemptions. Did he inherit the apartment from a parent, for example? If he inherited from a parent, then he is entitled to the same exemption that the parent would have been entitled to had he been the one to sell. Now, there's all these questions. It's very complicated, and you need to really, really do some tax planning. Sometimes you'd say, oh, maybe I should wait before I sell. Like, for example, a person living in Los Angeles owns an apartment in Israel. He wants to sell it, but he's thinking of moving to Israel in 5 months. So then maybe he should wait 5 months, move to Israel, and then sell it. And if it's his only apartment, he'll get the exemption from capital gains tax instead of selling it immediately. So these are all questions. It's tax planning that need to be done when you sell or buy apartment in Israel from abroad or whether you're in Israel. Can you move to the next slide? And I want to say something also that when I say foreign resident, Very often you have Israeli citizens, they have Israeli citizenship, but they don't live in Israel. They live abroad. So they're considered a foreign resident and they won't have the exemptions that an Israeli resident will have. On the other hand, you can have somebody who's a resident of Israel but doesn't have Israeli citizenship. That person could may be entitled to the exemptions because he's an Israeli resident. It all goes according to your tax residency at the time you do the transaction. Again, here I spoke about the betterment tax. It could be a hefty amount of money, um, and what I usually do is before, if I'm representing a person selling an apartment, I write a letter to municipality asking whether or not there will be betterment tax, and then I usually get a letter back that says that on this and this property, there were the following zoning changes. So if your client bought the apartment before the zoning change, he'll have betterment tax. And if he bought it after the zoning change, then he won't have betterment tax for that zoning change. So for every change in zoning, there could be a betterment tax. Sometimes it's a lot of money, sometimes it's not so much money. So if you think that your client's gonna have betterment tax, then I usually will consult with an appraiser, because who decides what the betterment tax is? It's an appraiser. He appraises what's the enhancements in the worth of the apartment as a result of the town plan changing, and then he'll say, and then it's 50% of the enhancement. So if the apartment is now worth 200,000 shekel more because of the change in the zoning, then the betterment tax could be 100,000 shekel. So it's not a small amount of money. Can we move to the next slide, please? Income tax. So first of all, you have income tax on rental income. A lot of people, this surprises a lot of people. A lot of times I get clients from the States, from England, and they're renting out the apartment and they're paying income tax to where they're living. Like they're paying income tax to the United States for rental income in Israel, not realizing that they also might have to pay income tax on rental income in Israel to the Israeli income tax authority. So, what you need to do is you need to take an accountant who will tell you there's different ways to calculate the tax that you could choose from, and whatever way is chosen, it could have an adverse effect on how much capital gains tax could be when you sell. So these are things you really have to be aware of. What I wrote here about Prisat Mas, that's what I explained about turning the capital gains tax into income tax and spreading it over 4 years and possibly getting some kind of a tax refund as a result. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, and here it is, estate tax or inheritance tax. You'll be happy to know we don't have it here. We don't have estate tax and we don't have inheritance tax. We used to have it, but it was done away with in 1983. And so I have nothing for this slide. We have no estate tax or inheritance tax, and that's why dealing with estates here is a lot easier than in other places in the world where they do have estate tax. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about wills. Israel has an inheritance law, and you make a will. We don't do wills with trusts and leaving the property to trusts and all of that. We don't need to because we don't have inheritance tax or estate tax, and we leave the property directly to the heirs and not to a trust. And a big tip I need to give any state attorneys out there that have clients that may own real estate in Israel. When you're making a will for such a person and you have to deal with their Israeli property, you must consult with an Israeli lawyer. And what we'll usually tell you, and what people usually do, is they make a separate Israeli will where whose property, and they leave it directly to heirs. Because if you go to the next slide, I think I deal with it there. Um, um, because in Israel, the kind of trusts that you guys set up in the States are not recognized as legal entities. And if it's not a legal entity, you can't register them in the land registry. So when we get an American will, for example, where everything is left to a trust and then it goes to the Israeli probate court and they give a probate order for the will, when it gets to the land registry, it causes a very big problem. So there's no tax incentive for leaving Israeli real estate to a trust here in Israel. So we just make a separate Israeli will, and we leave, and the property is left directly to the heirs, not to a trustee, not to a trust, et cetera, et cetera. And the wills are very simple. They're usually 2 or 3 pages. The will is signed before two witnesses. There's 3 different ways to do the will. Either you sign it before two witnesses. Of course, the witnesses cannot be heirs. Anybody who's an heir to the will cannot even be in the room when the will is signed. It could be signed in front of a notary, or it could be a will written. This is very rare, written by somebody on his deathbed. So we're not going to get into that. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then afterwards, there's the probate court. So for people who die in Israel, you go to the Israeli probate court. For people who died abroad but left an Israeli will, or they died intestate, if they died abroad, then it also goes to the Israeli probate court. But people who died abroad but left a foreign will, then it's going to go to the Israeli family court, which means it's going to take longer to get the probate order. Can we go to the next slide, please? And documents that I would need for a probate court for people who died abroad or died in Israel and do not have Israeli citizenship. I need basically what we need is the death certificate, meaning if they're Israeli citizens and they died in Israel, I don't need a death certificate because it's all computerized and they know if a person died or not. But if it's somebody who died abroad, I need to prove to the court, to the probate court, that the person actually died. So of course, I need an original death certificate with an apostille seal on it that authenticates it as a death certificate. Also, if the will was made abroad, I need an original copy of the will with original signatures. I know a lot of times people in the States, they only make, for some reason, only one copy. I always make more than one copy. And we always need, the courts demand here an original copy of the will with original signatures. And if it's a will made abroad, again, I'll need a legal opinion as to the foreign law. So if it was a will made in Los Angeles, I'll need a legal opinion from a lawyer who knows the California law. And that is all submitted to the court so that we can get a probate order. Can we go to the next slide, please? So a little bit of registration of title tips. This is just like technical things. So again, if the client owns Israeli real estate, make sure he makes an Israeli will. Keep all copies of identification documents, even if they expired. So what do I mean by that? In Israel, we're all given ID numbers. And when we buy property and we get registered in the land registry, it says our name and our ID number next to it. People from abroad don't necessarily have ID numbers. So what do we use? We use their passport. We could use their social security card number. We can use a driver's license. But some of these types of documents expire. And then you need to show the land registry that, for example, if we use a passport, we need to show that it's the same person now, but he just has a new passport. It's not a problem, but the land registry will ask to see a copy of the previous passport and of the new passport. So very often I ask clients, can you give me the passport that you had when you bought the property? And they'll tell me, oh, I don't have it. I threw it out. It expired. So what I need to say is that keep these things. I think when you can't get a canceled passport, they give it back to you. It says canceled on it, or at least keep a digital copy of it so that we don't run into problems in the land registry later on when you got to update your registration under new passport number. when you buy land or an apartment or a house, keep all the receipts for the sale, the lawyer's fee, the real estate agency fees, the renovations, because if you sell and you don't have an exemption from capital gains tax, all these receipts could be used to bring down the tax. But you just have to have the receipts. And then make sure that the registration of title took place, meaning if you bought an apartment or a house in Israel, don't assume that your lawyer did it. Ask him to send you the extract from the land registry. It's a very simple thing to get. It costs 17 shekel. It takes 5 minutes to get on the computer. Your real estate lawyer could send it to you to make sure you have it. And don't assume, because very often people think, oh, my lawyer registered for me. And then a few years later, they want to sell the property and then they find out it's not in their name. And in real estate, whenever things don't get done as soon as possible, they become complicated. So these are like simple little tips I could give to you. Can we go to the next slide, please? And again, people who are buying from abroad, I say surround yourself with good professionals. So it's the real estate attorney, it's the real estate agent, it's the engineer you hire, the appraiser, all these people. If you hire good professionals, you should be able to get through the deal okay. Another thing is when you're buying from abroad, how do we know how you're going to sign the contract if you're in the States and the contract's getting signed in Israel? So, of course, your real estate lawyer will send you a power of attorney. It could be in English. You could either go to the Israeli embassy and sign there. The Israeli consul is an Israeli notary, and he'll notarize the signature. And if that's not possible, you could go to a local notary, and then his signature is further approved in an apostille, and you send the original of this power of attorney to Israel, and your real estate lawyer could sign, could open up a bank account if you need to open up a bank account, if you need to, could help you set you up with Forex companies if you need to convert money from dollars to shekels for your real estate transaction. And so all these things could be done from abroad. And nowadays, my clients ask me to send them copies of the contract in Hebrew, even if they don't know Hebrew, but they use AI translation. And then they get more or less a basic translation. It's not bad, but I always go over the contract with them to make sure that the translation was done properly and that they understand the contract. Can we go to the next slide? And I just want to thank you all for listening to me. I think I went over my time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
That's boy, what a sensational presentation. Oh my God. With the history all the way to
Yeah,
administration.
you have to
Yes,
know if you're
yes,
going to get me to talk. I'm going to start with the history. I can't help
depth,
myself.
depth. I love it. Now, most of the questions we're over time already. One person has asked a lot of questions, but if I
Yeah.
could just encourage that person to look at Nicole's email address there and take it down, and her telephone numbers to talk to her directly. And I think almost everything was covered. I think, the only thing that wasn't, let's see if we just do a real quick one that really wasn't covered. It sounded like someone said, unlike in the States or in California, you go under contract, then you do due diligence. So it sounded to the person like in Israel, you do the due diligence, then you're under contract. Do we have that
Once you
right?
sign the contract, that's it. You have to fulfill it. So you must do your due diligence beforehand. And like they say, buyer beware. You got to check it out. You bring an engineer, you bring your appraiser,
Yeah.
you do your title search, you do everything beforehand. Once you sign the contract, you have to go through with it. And if you sign the contract and you see that you made a mistake, you really can't get out of it unless the other party agrees to let you out of it. or you might have to pay compensation. So really, you need to do your due diligence beforehand. Like, for
Got it.
example,
Got it.
if you want to finance it with a mortgage, you need to make sure you will be able to get a mortgage. You can't sign the contract and then realize you weren't approved a mortgage for whatever reason, and then come and say, okay, I'm sorry, I can't buy the apartment because I don't have a mortgage. No, you
Yeah.
have to find out. So you could get approval in principle from a mortgage bank, and everything like that. And one of the types of professionals that I forgot to mention is a mortgage consultant. That's a very important professional if you want to take a mortgage.
So I think because it was so action packed and we got questions,
Yeah.
please, inquire, particularly those of you who are interested in buying real estate in Israel, which if you're on this call, that's probably, or on the Zoom, that's probably the case. So
Mhm.
you have Nicole's information there to reach out to her directly. And it was just, action packed. Boy, did I learned a lot. And I
I,
came in knowing quite a bit about this, but I learned a whole lot in
I
the
just like to
action-packed
point
hour.
out on the lower right-hand side, I have a Calendly link. So if you want to make a Zoom meeting, you could press
Oh,
the
fantastic.
link and set up a meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Anyway, take a picture of that, whoever's on the line. And Nicole, thank you. What a wonderful presentation. So
Thank you. It was my
thank you,
pleasure.
everybody in the Zoomcast audience. Reach out to Nicole directly, and that's it for today's program. Goodbye, everyone.